Welcome to our LATAMPaper March 26th. World demand is under pressure. Latin America has great opportunities to develop.
The global economic outlook has been fundamentally disrupted since late February by the outbreak of open military conflict. The consequences for global demand have been immediate and severe. As of mid-March, Brent crude sits at approximately $106 per barrel. The conflict has already suspended roughly one-fifth of global crude and natural gas supply as Iran targets vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, forcing Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and Kuwait to halt or curtail shipments, with storage at Gulf facilities filling rapidly. The geopolitical risk that was merely theoretical at the start of Q1 has now materialized into a structural economic shock. What began as a battlefield event has hardened into a geoeconomic crisis, first hitting oil, gas, shipping, and aviation, then cascading into inflation, industrial costs, and food security, and ultimately threatening trade routes, investment decisions, and political stability across multiple continents. For businesses managing cross-border supply chains, particularly in energy-intensive industries and commodity-dependent sectors like paper and packaging, this is no longer a tail risk scenario. Force majeure clauses, freight surcharges, and energy cost indexation have moved from negotiating footnotes to contractual necessities. Heading into Q1 2026, Latin America's domestic consumption picture was already under pressure before the outbreak of the Iran conflict. Regional GDP growth was forecast to slow to 2.1%, with inflation still stubbornly above target in Brazil and Colombia, and tighter monetary policy beginning to squeeze consumers and firms. On the export front, the story was bifurcated. Andean nations were leading regional growth on the back of record copper and gold prices, while softer energy and agricultural commodity prices posed downside risks elsewhere. Simultaneously, fertilizer availability is becoming a growing concern. Around 41% of Latin America's urea imports transited the Strait of Hormuz in 2025, and with the strait now effectively closed, input costs for the 2026 to 27 crop cycle are rising sharply ahead of the September planting season. For agri-exporters, the shock is indirect but real. Higher freight insurance premiums and route diversions are pushing logistics costs up across all perishable trade lanes. On the commodity export side, the Iran conflict creates a split dynamic for the region. Copper and gold remain at elevated price levels, with copper exempt from the most restrictive U.S. tariffs for Chilean producers. For oil-exporting nations, the picture is more complex. Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and Ecuador benefit in principle from higher crude prices, but economists are already scaling back rate cut expectations as oil price inflation ripples through their economies, tightening financial conditions and threatening to slow the domestic consumption recovery.
Container Board 2026 has started in a pretty chaotic way. January was Venezuela with Maduro, February was Mexico with El Mencho, and now March with Iran. It's very hard to predict what April and the rest of this fire horse year will bring. I think we have several months of ups and downs in front of us. Rising energy and inland transportation costs have pushed most mills, especially in Europe, to move prices up. That said, demand still doesn't have the traction needed for those increases to fully stick in the market. We'll have to see how much of these increases the market is able to absorb. Logistics is another concern, as we're seeing meaningful surcharges depending the destination port. In Latin America, especially Central and South America, price increases are already being talked about. In Mexico, not yet, but conversations around increases have definitely started. Pulp. This week, Shanghai Pulp Week is taking place, which should give us a clearer read on market direction for the rest of the year. From our perspective, eucalyptus pulp is likely to remain on an upward trend, while long fiber may find some stability. That said, there are still plenty of questions around demand in the Middle East and where that volume could be redirected. On top of that, logistics are likely to remain challenging.
Thank you for watching. See you soon.